All right, so we are going to label this diagram of the brain. There are 6 blanks that we're going to fill out here. When you get finished with this, go to the chart that is also posted in Classroom and look through. It's got all of these things, these parts of the brain that we're going to label, and then some more. It's got all the functions, or not, maybe not all, but a lot of the functions of each of these parts of the brain, and then it's got like how those would look in real life. I'd like for you to look through that, read through that. That's really important. It's really important to know, to be educated on, like, okay, what part of my brain is responsible for what action. That way, if something were to happen, or if you see somebody acting strangely after, like, maybe a bad car wreck or something like that, then you may be able to help figure out, hey, I think that maybe it's this part of your brain. Let's go get that checked out. So you can either watch this video and then open up the assignment on Cami and complete your diagram, or you can open the video and open the assignment at the same time and just pull them up in side-by-side windows and complete it as you watch the video. It's up to you. Just make sure that you get this finished on time, and please don't wait until the last minute to get everything turned in, okay? I want you to learn. I want you to go through this. I want you to ask questions. Yeah. So this stuff is really, really cool because everything that we're going to talk about this year in science is going to affect you. It's going to be something that you can actually use, something that makes sense, something we can relate to real life. It's not going to be too abstract thinking. It's going to be really like, you should be able, if you can't see that in your life now, you'll be able to see it in your life in the next 3 or 4 years. So it's really important. So we're going to, let's just start at the top here. And I'm just going to label these. I'm not going to put any kind of function or definition or anything like that. I'm just going to put the name because, again, I want you to look at that diagram, that chart that is posted in Classroom that talks more in depth about each of these parts of the brain. So these 4, before we start real quick, these 4 places, these are called lobes. So you have 4 main lobes or sections of your brain. So this, and again, this is important to keep in mind. This is a 2D model. This is just from the side. So really you have this side, and then you have in real life, so you have one side, you also have this side of your brain. So right here, this is the front of your brain. So this is the front of your head. So we have had some very, very smart scientists name this front part of your brain, the front lobe, the frontal lobe. Oh, that's pretty easy to remember. And pretty much the frontal lobe, some things that's responsible for will be movement, thinking happens here, and lots of other things. Look at the diagram. I don't want to make this a 20-minute video talking about everything that each part of your brain does, because you can read that later. So this part of your brain right here, this is called the parietal lobe. And it is here and here. It's on both sides of your head. Okay, you got 2 parts of the brain, 2 hemispheres is what we call them. So that your parietal lobe is like your sensation, it's perception, like spatial perception, touch, things like that. This is the back of your brain, so it's the back of your head. And this lobe is called the occipital lobe. I'm 99% sure that's spelled right. Occipital, I think so. And what that does is, like, this is the front of your head, right? But the occipital lobe is way in the back of your head. That actually, one thing that is really responsible for is your sight. So that's pretty crazy that this part of your brain sort of controls stuff that's way over here on the other side of your head. So, and then over here, this is like right here on the side of your head. And you have probably had people tell you, don't hit him or her too hard right here in the temple, right? It's dangerous. Well, it's really close. This part of your brain is really close to your temple, and it's actually called the temporal lobe. So, and this one, if you think about it, it's really close to your ears. So, one thing that the temporal lobe is responsible for is hearing. You've got something called your auditory cortex there. You take anatomy in college, you'll learn a whole lot more about that. I won't bore you today. So these four lobes actually make up a part of your brain called the cerebrum. So that's like this big section of your brain, the majority of your brain. Then down here we have these two extra parts. So, and this is really the other part. This is an extension from your brain. But anyway, so we'll talk about this one first. This is called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is like balance and coordination. That's, the big thing the cerebellum is responsible for. So this doesn't necessarily mean when we talk about this every year, somebody asks, is that why I'm not coordinated? It's because my cerebellum's messed up. No. Your cerebellum, your balance and coordination is like if you were like, you had a certain degree of coordination, and then you had like a traumatic fall where you had blunt force trauma to the head, and then suddenly after that you have significantly worse, balance and coordination. That would be when there's something going on with your cerebellum. If you're just not coordinated, you're just not coordinated. So we're talking about, when we do talk about like things, if we get back in class soon, we'll talk about like things that can happen, like damage to each of these lobes and to the cerebellum and this part, which I'm not going to say yet. But that's always a question. Is like, I don't see good. Is it because my occipital lobe is messed up? Maybe, but not necessarily. But anyway, so that's the cerebellum. And then this part is not really part of the brain necessarily, but it connects the brain with something that's really important, the spinal cord. It's called the brain stem. So it's sort of like the end, sort of the brain. So this part actually connects. If you look at like a really good model, which you can look this up, Google it when we get finished if you want to, of like the inside of your body, you would see that this goes seamlessly with the spinal cord. So you wouldn't really, if you're just looking at a model, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference in the brainstem and the spinal cord because they sort of go together. But your brainstem, that's going to be like your unconscious things, your subconscious things, like involuntary stuff, like your breathing, your heart rate, things like that. So one other thing that I want to talk about really quickly, that's it as far as things we're labeling. We got all 6 parts labeled. I told you that this part of the brain, these 4 lobes, are the big chunk of the brain. That's called the cerebrum. And this other little part, this little under part, is called the cerebellum. So your brain is really split into 2 sort of things, 2 sort of pieces. And the way I've always been told is your cerebellum is like your thumb. So I remember your cerebellum, that's your balance, your coordination, things like that. And then you have all 4 of these lobes that come over that cerebellum. So most of your brain is going to be these 4 lobes. So most of the things that happen, with your brain happen here. But you've got that inner working part, the cerebellum, that's really important too. So that's just the way that I remember it. If you ever do take anatomy in college or high school or whatever, you have to remember that cerebellum, and then the big chunk of your brain are the lobes, the 4 main lobes. So, like I said, I hope that we get back in-person classes soon because I really like talking about this, and I'd really like to do a couple of the labs with you and talk more about the brain and see sort of, some crazy stuff that can happen with it. But if you need any help with anything, if you want to talk more about this, if you have any questions, please let me know. I miss seeing you guys.